Well, thank you for being with us this morning. If you're a guest with us today, just want to extend a special welcome to you. Thank you for being part of Mission Community Church on this Easter Sunday, 2016. If I haven't met you, my name is Jason. I'm the pastor here at the church, and we are glad that you are here to celebrate the risen Lord with us today. I don't know where you stand when it comes to the historical accuracy of the resurrection of Jesus. It is the greatest fact, in my opinion. It is the greatest fact in human history, for it is pivotal. It is the pivotal event in which our faith and trust rest upon. Because if he remained in that grave, if he remained in that tomb, then everything that we believe means nothing. Jesus would have been just a guy that came and did good things and taught good sermons and then died in the grave. Throughout the centuries, up until our present time, skeptics have argued against the historical reliability of Jesus' resurrection. A few years ago, a well-known atheist, Richard Dawkins, he says this about the resurrection. Accounts of Jesus' resurrection and ascension are about as well documented as Jack and the Beanstalk. I think we know where he stands on that event and where his belief is in that. Even on a grander scale, I believe that there is a creator God who created all that there is. And at the pinnacle of his creation was you and me, humankind, made in his image and in his likeness. And for some reason, we rebelled against the creator and decided to worship the creation, separating us from him, breaking our relationship with our creator. And that in the grander scheme that from the beginning of time, God had a plan to restore us back into relationship with himself through his son, Jesus, who came to die for my sin, came to die for your sin, came to die for all mankind's sin. That he was beaten, broken, crushed, he died, he was buried in a tomb, and then 3 days later he rose again. That serves as the very foundation for all of my hope and belief. And it's completely changed the way I look at life, the way I act, the things that I say. It changes everything about me. And there are 3 reasons why I believe this. And I want to take you through those 3 reasons as we look at a very familiar passage this morning out of John as it centers around the resurrection. And so if you have your Bibles today, we're going to be looking at John chapter 20. John chapter 20. And there is a story that happens through these next couple of verses that I'm going to try to get us into a little bit more deeply. If possible, try to put yourself in some of these characters' shoes and in some of the situations that they found themselves in and see if we can maybe relate to them a little bit here today. So John chapter 20, starting in verse 1. I'm going to be reading from the English Standard Version, depending on the version that you have. Now, on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb early while it was still dark. Now, I want to pause right there and give you a little bit of a background of who this Mary Magdalene is. There's very little known about Mary Magdalene prior to her coming to faith in Jesus. There's a couple of verses in Luke chapter 8, verses 1 and 2, where Mary Magdalene is listed in a list of other women who were possessed by demons. And for some reason, it says that Mary Magdalene was possessed by 7 demons. She's pointed out amongst the rest of the other women in which she's listed among. And the reason why, we don't really know for sure, but if one person is possessed by a demon, I mean, that is enough to completely mess up your life. But the fact that she was possessed by 7 demons, I think we can infer from that her life was absolutely a wreck. Perhaps insanity just plagued her. This soft-spoken, generous person who was, for some reason, lived a lifestyle in which demons could come in and possess her and was completely wrecked by it. But then Jesus, for some reason, looks into the eyes of Mary Magdalene and doesn't see a demon-possessed woman, but rather sees a sweet angel that can be used in such a mighty way. Jesus ends up casting these demons out of Mary Magdalene, and Mary Magdalene becomes one of the most influential, devoted followers of Jesus and his ministry during that time. I mean, she was hugely influential to him as she met his needs through, whether it be financially or just in support of everything that he was doing. Anywhere that Jesus went, Mary Magdalene was there. When Jesus was being tossed back and forth between Pilate and Herod during the whole trials, as Jesus was coming under attack, Mary was there, witnessing all of this, seeing the scrutiny that Jesus was coming under. When Jesus was actually hanging on the cross, Mary was there watching it all as people beat him, made fun of him, scourged him. In the darkest moment of history, when Jesus gave up his spirit and darkness covered the earth, Mary Magdalene was there. Mary Magdalene was there after Jesus has died to actually help dig his body down off of that cross and to put it into the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. Mary's devotion to Jesus, both physically in life and in death, is astounding. There's a poem that's written after her. The poem goes like this: "Not with traitorous kiss her master stung. Not she denied him with unfaithful tongue. She, when apostles fled, could dangers brave. Last at the cross and earliest at the grave." So here you have Mary Magdalene who didn't betray Jesus like Judas did, who didn't deny Jesus like Peter did, who didn't flee Jesus when all the other apostles fled, but stuck close by his side. We pick it up back in John chapter 20, that she arrived at the grave early after the Sabbath. It was still dark, and saw that the stone had been taken away from the tomb. So she ran and went to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved, and said to them, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him." So although Jesus personally delivered Mary from the possession of these demons, and although Mary witnessed Jesus perform all kinds of miracles, and although she showed such devotion to Jesus, she missed the point when he said that the Son of Man must be crucified and risen from the dead. Notice that when she gets to the tomb, it says that she sees that the stone had been rolled away. So I find it interesting that the only thing Mary sees is a rolled away stone. She doesn't actually go into the tomb to see if Jesus' body was still there. The fact that she just saw the tomb and then she ran and jumped to a conclusion. She ran to Peter and to John, the one whom Jesus loved, and said, "They have stolen his body, and I don't know where they have taken him." So her conclusion was, there were grave robbers. For some reason, his body is gone. Why? Why did Mary jump to that conclusion? I was wrestling with that all week. I mean, she had been with Jesus through the worst of it all. She had personally experienced him being delivered from these demons, the scourgings, the hangings, the darkest skies. Why would she not go into the tomb? And perhaps she was so weighted down, and this is conjecture at this point. Nothing will say this in the Bible, but perhaps she was so weighted down by her Lord and her Savior being gone that when she saw the rolled away tomb, it was a distraction that could get her off of the deep mourning that she was in. And logically, she could come to the conclusion that, grave robbers must have stolen his body. Let's pick it up in verse 3 of John chapter 20. So after Mary had gone and told John and Peter, it says, "So Peter ran out with the other disciple, and they were going toward the tomb. Both of them were running together, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. And stooping to look in, he saw the linen cloths lying there, but he did not go in. So this one, when in this passage where it talks about the other disciple, this is talking of John, the one who actually is writing this gospel of John. So let me give you a little bit of background on John, the one whom Jesus loved. It is well known that Jesus led a band of misfits, 12 disciples, all coming from various backgrounds. And within that group of 12, there was a closer-knit group of 3 in which Jesus clung to: Peter, James, and John. As you look throughout the Gospels, there's a couple of instances where some of the more miraculous miracles that Jesus performed, if you can even say one miracle is more miraculous than the other, Jesus would invite Peter, James, and John to witness some of these things. Early church tradition was unanimous in identifying John as this one whom Jesus loved. And so for some reason, there was a special connection between Jesus and John. They were best friends. And we don't know exactly what that looked like, but if you have a best friend in this room, then we can get an idea of what that was like. After his resurrection, Jesus entrusted John with the care of his mother. Jesus allowed John to see the transfiguration, to see the actual glory of God. Jesus allowed John to witness some of his most amazing miracles, and even afterwards gave John this magnificent vision of heaven in which he recorded later on in Revelation. And so there is this close-knit connection between Jesus and John. So both Peter and John are running towards the tomb after Mary is claiming that someone has stolen Jesus' body. John gets there first. I mean, perhaps his deep love and devotion to Jesus just caused him to run faster than Peter did. But when John got there, it says that he knelt down and looked in. Verse 5, and stooping to look in, he saw the linen cloths lying there, but he did not go in, just like Mary. Why didn't he go in? It says that when Mary got there, it was dark, and so maybe by the time John got there, it was still kind of dark. And if you've ever been in a graveyard before in the dark, there's kind of like an eeriness in that whole environment. And so perhaps as he got there, he was plagued by that eeriness, but at the same time, he looked in and saw the linen cloths lying there. And we don't know exactly what he saw. Did he see what he thought appeared to be Jesus' body still wrapped up in those cloths? Or was it just the cloths and he knew Jesus' body was gone? And so he starts to look at the situation and begin to say, well, it can't be grave robbers. Because if it was grave robbers, why wouldn't they just take the body and run? Why would they take time to unwrap the cloths that wrapped Jesus' body and then rewrap it all nice and neatly back on where he lay? So it didn't make sense to him that someone had stolen his body. And even if you wanted to steal the body and leave the cloths there, wouldn't you just rip them apart, kind of cut them open and just grab Jesus' body and run? It would be all mangled all over the place in the tomb. But it says that he stooped in, saw the linen cloths, and John began evaluating the evidence around him, the physical environment around him. He knew it wasn't grave robbers, but perhaps he still wasn't positive what had happened. So we pick it up in John chapter 20 and verse 6. It says, then Simon Peter came following him and went into the tomb. He saw the linen cloths lying there, and the face cloth which had been on Jesus' head not lying with the linen cloths, but folded up in place by itself. Then the other disciple, John, who was hanging out at the outside, who had reached the tomb first, also went in, and he saw and believed. For as yet they did not understand the scripture that he must rise from the dead. Let me give you a little background on Peter. So we had Mary, we have John, now Peter. Peter is one of the very first disciples that Jesus calls. He's out in the water catching fish. He's a fisherman, and Jesus says, hey, come follow me. I will make you fishers of men. Peter is this outspoken, ardent, enthusiastic, strong-willed, impulsive, and sometimes brash person. I think all of us kind of like Peter because he just says what's on his mind. He wears his heart on his sleeve. It was Peter who got out of the boat and walked on water, but then as he took his eyes off Jesus, he began to sink. The picture that we get of Peter is that he says all the right things, he says all the right words and does all the right things, but just a couple verses later finds a way to mess it all up. It's Peter who confesses that Jesus Christ was Lord, the Son of the living God, when everybody else was saying of Jesus, oh, this is Elijah reincarnated, or this is Moses. It was Peter who said, no, you are the Christ, Son of the living God. And then just a few verses later rebukes Jesus when Jesus says that he must suffer and die. Jesus then turns to him, get out of him, Satan. It's Peter who cut off the guard's ear when the soldiers were coming to arrest Jesus. But then Jesus told him to sheathe his sword. It was Peter who boasted that he would never, ever forsake or deny the Lord, but then later denied him 3 times before the rooster crowed. So this same Peter acted on impulse and ran directly into the tomb. He didn't stop, he just went for it. Peter sees the empty linens lying there where Jesus' body once lay. He sees the cloth that was covering Jesus' face neatly folded in another area of the tomb. And surely this wasn't grave robbers. And the text says that John came in after him. He saw the situation and they saw and believed in verse 8. Jesus' body wasn't stolen by robbers. He's risen. He's risen. He's risen? Verse 9, for as they did not understand the scripture that he must rise from the dead. They saw, they believed, but they didn't yet have a full understanding of what was happening. Here's one of my main points for us this morning. For Mary, for John, for Peter, the empty tomb demanded a response. It demanded a response. They observed the situation around them. They saw the physical world around them, and it drove them to a response because just 3 days ago, they took Jesus off the cross and put him in a tomb, and he's no longer there. So for Mary, the response was grave robbers. For John, we're not quite sure what his initial response was as he looked in and saw the linen cloths, but he had some sort of response in which it wasn't Jesus had risen. But then eventually, as Peter and John both go into the tomb and see the linen cloths empty, they saw and believed. So the empty tomb demands a response, but then God's word also demands a response. Because it says that they remembered the scriptures, but they didn't quite understand what was going on. For me, for Jason, getting away from Mary, Peter, and John, the physical world around me, represented by that empty tomb, demanded a response. And so there are moments in which I catch myself gazing into the night sky and I start to think about the number of stars that are in the sky. And I begin to think about the number of planets that are in the sky and the number of galaxies that are in the universe and how the universe is this ever-expanding thing. And quickly my mind gets all tripped up about how massive this thing is that we live in. And then here's little old me in the center of this massive universe. I look at the miracle of life and the birth of my kids. And I look at the complexity of life, being a biology undergrad student. I look at the complexity of life and I think to myself, surely this couldn't just happen with some explosion in the sky 13.7 billion years ago. That everything is so complex. How can you have something that is so complex come from some explosion in the sky? It began not to make sense to me. If everything is headed towards a state of disorder, how is it that things are so unique and so specific and wired so perfectly? So not only does the empty tomb demand my response, not only does the physical world around me demand my response, I also had to respond to the scriptures, to God's word. And my response to the physical world around me was there has to be someone or something bigger that's causing all of this to happen. There's something supernatural about the life that we live in. And then you come to God's word, which demands a response. The Bible never claimed to be a secular history book. It never claims to be that. It claims to be a spiritual history of God's people and how he dealt with them. Yet the Bible is often relied upon by secular historians, anthropologists, and archaeologists. So there's one quote here from the Smithsonian Department of Anthropology. They are reported to have said this about the Bible. A secular institution says this: much of the Bible, in particular the historical books of the Old Testament, are as accurate historical documents as any that we have from antiquity, and are, in fact, more accurate than many of the Egyptian, Mesopotamian, or Greek histories. The biblical records can be and are used as are other ancient documents in archaeological work. For the most part, historical events described took place and the peoples cited really existed. So you have a secular institution that relies on the Bible for historical events, people, places. There are two great 20th century archaeologists, William Albright and Nelson Glueck. Both of them are non-Christian and secular in their upbringing and tradition. They both laud the Bible as the single most accurate source document from history. Now, I can't prove to you today in a short sermon that the Bible is historically accurate. The only thing I can encourage you to do is to search that out for yourself. But here's what I will say, that mere theoretical belief, observing the world around us, the empty tomb, and more than just mere intellectual belief, understanding the scriptures, these two things don't always result in a living faith, a dynamic faith. Because we see in John chapter 20, verse 10, then the disciples went back to their homes. So here they are, they're in the tomb, they know that Jesus has risen from the dead, and they have an understanding, some sort of an understanding of the scriptures, but they're not quite putting it together. So mere theoretical and intellectual belief isn't always enough. We know that in studying the Gospels later that both Peter and John see the resurrected Jesus for themselves, and from that point forward, their faith takes off. Their belief completely changes how they live and how they act. And that's why sometimes our response to an empty tomb and our response to God's word isn't enough. We need to respond to one more thing. So we pick it up back in John chapter 20 and verse 11. But Mary, so here we are, we come back to our dear sister Mary, stood weeping outside the tomb. And as she wept, she stooped to look into the tomb. And she saw two angels in white sitting where the body of Jesus had lain, one at the head and one at the feet. They said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" She said to them, "They have taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him." Having said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing, but she did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus says to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you seeking?" Supposing him to be the gardener, she said to him, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned and said to him in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. So even after Peter and John enter the tomb, conclude that it wasn't grave robbers, concluded that Jesus' body has risen, but he wasn't quite sure yet what that meant. Even after this happened, Mary is still thinking it's a grave robbing. Mary asks two angels. She's talking to angels. The angels say, "Why are you weeping?" "Well, somebody has stolen my Lord. Tell me where you've put him." And then she turns and she asks Jesus. She's talking to Jesus. And Jesus says, "Why are you weeping? Who are you seeking?" "Somebody has taken my Lord. Tell me where you've laid him." She still thinks it's a grave robbing. But then, in the still small voice that calmed the seas, Jesus says to her, "Mary." Mary. And it's in that very moment that Mary encounters, has a personal experience with Jesus, the risen Lord. And she believes. We see in verses 17 and 18 of John chapter 20, Jesus said to her, "Do not cling to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father, but go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to the Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went and announced to the disciples, "I have seen the Lord," and that he said these things to her. So Mary sees Jesus, hears Jesus, touches Jesus, has a personal experience with Jesus, and it completely changed her outlook, completely changed the conclusion that she reached. He is alive. He is risen. He is resurrected. So what does this mean for us? Just as it was for Mary, John, and Peter, the empty tomb demands a response. As you look through history, there is an empty tomb. Jesus' body isn't there. It demands a response from us. Number 2, God's word demands a response. I don't know where you are on that topic, on that subject, whether or not you rely on the word of God. For me, I believe that God's word is truth. Do you believe that? And then finally, a personal experience with Jesus demands a response. So the question then to ask is, have you experienced him? Because we might have an opinion of what happened in that tomb, and it might be a right opinion that Jesus' body was resurrected. We might have an opinion or a response to God's word, but sometimes those two things aren't enough. Have you experienced Jesus for yourself? For me, it came in the summer of 2000. When I was living a certain way, I was doing all the right things, caught up in church, doing the religious thing, and I realized that this isn't what it's about. It's about a personal relationship experience with Jesus. And I would admit to you today that as I read the scriptures more and as I dig into it more, I come out sometimes with more questions than I do answers. But as I've seen Jesus personally work in my own life, as I see him work in the lives of others around me, it demands a response. And my faith continues to get stronger and stronger and stronger. And so I have a question for you. Have you experienced Jesus? And if we have, it ought to change everything about us. The way we talk, the way we live, the way we view life. It ought to change everything about us. He is risen. He is risen indeed. And if he was left in that tomb, then this wouldn't be happening today. I mean, I think the fact that we gather here today is evidence that he rose from the dead. The church started in Jerusalem. If it didn't start based on the resurrection, then the church wouldn't have grown. If he was dead in that tomb, there would be no church that started. It would be the biggest hoax in human history. He is risen. He is risen indeed. Have you experienced him?